So hi Jesper, welcome to another episode of our podcast. And yes, I've been knowing you for many years, but maybe you could say something, some sort of introduction.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much, Dennis, for letting me take part of your video logs. If I should say anything about myself, of course, it's most interesting what my professional experience is. I'm educated as a computer scientist, so I have entered IT and IT development and management with a technical background that I think have helped me in many situations and in many discussions with the people in my job. For the beginning of my career, I was working as a software engineer myself, doing programming, doing architectural work, and working as project manager. But for something like 17 years ago, I actually started working as a manager within IT, mostly in software management, as development manager. I've been working for IT suppliers, for media houses. That's where we met.
Exactly, many years back.
Within insurance and within digital media bureaus, that's actually where I'm currently working in a somewhat medium-sized digital bureau. And for most of my career, I've been working in Copenhagen and the vicinity of Copenhagen. So I've been doing Agile transformations all the time. I've been working as manager. So that's in 17 years in something like 5 or 6 or 7 different setups, where I've been doing it from 1 to 7 teams, and from something like from 5 to 100 persons involved in these agile transformations. So that have, of course, given me some level of experience of how to do it.
And that's the topic we would like to discuss today.
Yes, and that I hope might interest some people. I've been taking role as manager, but also as agile coach. I've been taking role as Scrum Master and product owner, sometimes both roles at the same time if the setup has been small during these transformations. So that is actually part of my background professionally. Currently I'm in the company called Ambition in Copenhagen, where we also work a lot with data and data analysis for helping companies doing sales and marketing efforts. That's extremely interesting. Finally, to be able to actually utilize methods that I learned in computer science schools for artificial intelligence, machine learning, and etc. That has taken something like 20 years to actually become a business area of interest. But finally, a lot of people is interested in these areas also in my current job. So that was a bit about my background. I have a strong interest in agile and agile development and how to perform agile in a good way that I can actually help to support business operations and IT development. And I have a strong interest in doing good quality assurance as part of that as well.
So you've been educated as the computer scientist. I haven't known half of the background. That's exciting and fantastic. But I always knew this like that. Like, what made you interested in this whole agile area?
Well, I've been working as I told you, I've been working as project manager in many years in my career, and doing a lot of traditional project management stuff. And I also used an impressive amount of time dealing with the resource allocation and resource assignment, and I experienced as project plans is changing, a project manager typically uses too much time to reallocate people to accommodate change plans. So I had a strong interest in the part of traditional project management that actually emphasized iterative development and emphasized prototyping for many years. And when the extreme programming ideas evolved, I also had a strong interest in them. So around 20 years back, I actually had a kind of what you call mental preparedness for agile ideas. What happened is actually around 2003, I was working as team manager in a large company, which actually made insurance coverage systems for unemployment funds. And they had started out a huge product development, which has been going on for something like 2-3 years before I joined the company. I joined it actually as a programmer, but quickly became a team manager. And this product development was just evolving, and then they added and bought, they boarded new customers and boarded new sets of requirements. So what I experienced was that I became part of overburdened and suffering organization, which experienced a constant change of focus and a constant change of priorities and a massive amount of resource requests from many stakeholders. They had a number of customer project managers, which all the time to satisfy their goal had to drag out development resources in order to make new bids or make new proposals. And at the same time, the customers was nagging and requesting plans for when could this product development become ready, when could they start utilizing this new massively late product. And actually, I experienced that people became ill due to this. We had 3 cases of long-time sickness leaves among something like these 80 people, and people were leaving the places for new jobs. So they also had a quite high turnover of people. At that time, I participated in a project management conference, and I actually listened to a speech about the Scrum process, which was quite new at that time. Very few people have heard about agile development and the Scrum process. And actually, I became very interested in it, and it seemed like a recipe, kind of recipe to cure many of the illnesses of the current organization. Having a process that could help a development organization to maintain focus, and that could help developers to actually work on the same thing in an amount of time, that was amazing, I thought. Shortly thereafter, I was actually requested to step up as department manager because of an organizational change where I would actually become responsible for that product development. And I actually said, yes, that sounds really interesting, but I insist that I can introduce this method called Scrum, which was completely new to the people listening to me. But fortunately, there was also some auditors from the owning organization. It was a Finnish-owned company, so they had brought some Finns to audit. And these auditors have heard about Scrum and heard about prior successes to that. And for that reason, I actually got top management support for this request that I insisted on introducing a completely new method for something like that would involve 80 to 100 persons.
Wow.
That was quite luckily that I got this support due to some previous successes
and successes of the methodology, I guess.
yeah,
Yeah.
of some previous successes from some early adapters somewhere else. So actually, what I did was actually that I gathered a team. I got a full-time process consultant which could work with me for 3 months, and I gathered a team of people who I actually persuaded that this was a good idea. And then with this team, we used something like 3 months to prepare the turnover for that complete organization, which was involving quite a lot of changes.
So was this the change for the team, or more like you've been preparing the change for the whole organization with these people?
I was preparing the change for the whole organization, and it also required some organizational changes in that setup. What I did was actually, there was a number of team managers. The organization was already formed in teams, and what I did was actually that I decided to use these team managers, which was already heading some teams, but without direct management responsibilities, and appointed them as Scrum Masters. And myself, as not as product owner, I made an agreement with a commercial project manager as product owner, and myself as the proxy, the person actually enabling the product ownership. And then I sent it out these to be Scrum Masters on education, and I also hired a company to make a one-day education of all people involved, which was something like 80 persons directly involved in 5 or 6 teams.
So you were the line manager for these group managers, right?
Yes, I was the line manager. So therefore, I had actually the ability to appoint them as Scrum Masters. And this was my first Agile transformation. And of course, I did something right and I did something wrong. One of my big mistake was actually that I tried to, in order to make the adoption easier, I actually renamed all the terminology of Scrum to something that was more familiar to them, like calling a sprint an iteration and calling a Scrum Master something else. And that was actually a mistake. Okay. That actually made it less obvious for the involved people that this was something completely new. And it also made it more difficult for them to actually compare notes when they were speaking with people in their network.
Oh, that's interesting, because nowadays you see like people are saying, well, if you have a business that is not willing to change, do small steps, introduce them to everyone, so the change is less painful, but smaller. And here, I guess it was the opposite situation. The organization really needed change and they were willing to change. And because you were trying to impose lower risks, now they kind of didn't notice that much of a difference. And it was, as you say, hard for them to be on the same wave with everyone else.
Well, they actually noted a substantial difference, but it was more the second point, that it was more difficult for them to actually discuss this with their peers in their networks. Because I actually translated all the terminology into something else. But people were, the Scrum Masters were still educated as such. It was before actually you could be certified as Scrum Master, but you could still get a 2-day course in Scrum Mastering.
Can we get a bit in this topic about being a Scrum Master and having managerial responsibility? I think this is still a very hot topic, at least here in Sweden, where many organizations have formal role of a group manager, a person who's responsible for the small group of people, I think between 2 and 15, something like that. Yes. And at the same time, these groups very often have Scrum Masters as the unit. And in some organizations, they do not have that. They have just one person doing both kind of roles. And in your case, it was one person combining both roles. How was it for them?
Actually, the previous team managers was not having a management responsibility. It was more like a team leader role. But it was actually one of the pitfalls of my first transformation, because they were used to actually assigning tasks to people. Because they were actually trained in traditional project management, and the people were used to go to their team manager and ask, what should I do next? That was actually one thing that I would have done different. That was actually to appoint the Scrum Master role to somebody else, because it was really, really difficult in that setup to actually get people to get self-organized, so they could go to the sprint backlog rather than their former team manager and do the self-assessment of what should I do next, rather than what task should be assigned to me. Please give it to me, Mr. Scrum Master.
Oh, that's a big shift in the mindset.
And actually, I think personally, it's very, very difficult to be manager and Scrum Master at the same time. I have tried it, and I need. It was in another setup, and with I just had responsibility for single team, so there was not enough people to staff the different roles. I really personally had to be very, very aware of when was I acting as a product owner, when was I acting as a Scrum Master, when was I acting as a manager, and a manager acting as a Scrum Master must be extremely aware of what role do they actually engage in, and they would never be able to get the same level of confidence from the team members as a Scrum Master that is not a manager would, because at the end of the day, I would still be the boss for those people, and I will still actually have the possibility of hiring and firing them. Whereas a Scrum Master that does not have management responsibility would more be a peer, somewhat that you could actually really tell what is on your mind, and really tell of what is actually that should be mitigated in order to do my job in a more informal way.
Yes.
So my personal experience is that I would try to avoid this clash of roles as much as possible, or at least the people involved should be very, very aware of when do they act in one role and when do they act in other role.
Super good point.
So, but there were many experiences to draw from that, and of course, we had to talk about them. But the most important thing is actually that Scrum was a kind of cure to the sick organization. We actually could measure less turnover. The people that was on sick leave for stress, that vanished. So actually, when they could come back from the sick leaves due to stress and engage in this organization where people experienced, they were able to maintain the focus of their work. They were able to work on one priority at a time. And we could also measure that for the department. There was a yearly measurement of employee satisfaction. So we could actually very, very substantially measure employee satisfaction from one year to the next, which was mainly attributed to this introduction of the new organization, which I consider as that was really a success for actually curing organization that was ill. The most important thing is, of course, to have happy customers and be able to proceed in order to deliver a successful product. And there were also other things we did. We did actually make agreements with the customers to staff the Scrum teams with their people, so they could actually evaluate and test the product very early in the process and participate in the development. That was actually also quite successful, and that also helped us to regain confidence with the set of customers that was involved in and actually funding the development in the end.
Any changes in that? Any changes in the revenue of the organization? Were you able to see that or track that? Because usually when you have happier people, we know that they make better products. And
yeah,
the change in the organization.
It would not be the right way to measure that in revenue, on revenue streams, because it actually, if nothing has been done, the complete department of that company would have closed, and they would have lost investments close to a billion Danish kroners. So it was actually more a matter of moving towards success, of being able to deliver a product, rather than measuring revenue streams. Avoid a massive investment of something like $1 billion ending up on the floor. So concerning the financials, it was also in the long run a success, because this product actually does exist today and is used by half of the unemployment insurance funds of Denmark. But it took quite a long journey to be there, and I was part of the early redirection of that development towards a more stable situation, something like 3 years. So the massive investment was actually kept and maintained.
Wow, that's a fantastic story, actually. That was your number one, right?
Yeah, that was transformation number one. And it was actually very, very something very important was done there. Out of pure luck, I did something right. First of all, I did maintain a focus on people, which of course is also in alignment with the Agile Manifesto. By making allies and by forming a group of people, a small team to prepare, and by educating people. They were not only educated in Scrum, they were also educated in coaching techniques. That's actually important to teach technical-minded people that should work as Scrum Masters to be able to coach. So they learn how to ask questions rather than constantly serving solutions. So the Scrum Master got this twofold education. Secondly, I also did this careful preparation and built a roadmap of what steps should be done. But most importantly, in order to ensure success, is that we started with something that was really, really critical for the business.
Oh.
And this is actually, I would say that this is actually important in order to ensure success, rather than a lot of people say they sell tryouts with something, a pilot project on something that is not important, something that we can actually
easy and cheap,
easy let go of, and we will not lose a large investment by using a non-critical pilot project. At the same time, when nothing is at stake, you also invite all the enemies of change to actually jeopardize your pilot project, because the business will not go down if a non-critical pilot project is actually a failure. And this recipe of starting out with something that is really, really critical is actually something that I used again and again, because, well, I asked for top management level support, and I get it. They do not always understand what they actually vouch for and what they actually support. I do my best to explain it, but if the business is at stake, they will actually live up to that support rather than being out.
Oh.
And this first with this insurance company, that was a main new product. It was the major development going on. So of course that was essential. In the media house where the two of us met, Dennis, that was also something that was actually really critical for that media
part
because
of their,
it involved all of their 80 websites, all their main digital development and all the app development at a later point in time. So it was really critical to succeed with that.
that was part of their business strategy. Like if they don't do it, they don't survive, and they realized that quite early.
So all the potential enemies of the change rather had to to join forces than trying to jeopardize this goal, because otherwise they would lose the job themselves, because the business would go down. So this is actually something that I would claim is important in order to succeed with an agile transformation. In the media house, I know there was other things at stake. It was also a nearshoring setup that called for resistance of its own, but it was done in an agile setup that actually required the complete organization, the complete development organization to change according to that. So that's actually something that I would say is important in agile transformation. Find something critical and start with it.
And I guess this is also one of the good ways to, like, as you say, you always have like the opposition, those people who will, well, maybe brag about it, maybe will not be happy about it. But this is a good way to kind of avoid this resistance by putting everything, maybe not setting everything in the air, but making sure that what is happening is going to affect the whole business, and making sure that everyone understands that the success is critical for the business. So to get them on board, and everyone does their, that's really good tip.
Yes, and I can also, looking backwards, I can also see where I didn't succeed that well. Is also could be tracked down to many sources, but one of the points is actually that we were started out with something that was not critical, that did not affect the organization enough if it failed.
That's a pretty tough topic. I mean, from one hand, you might have top management be really resistant to that. You're changing the most business critical area, the backbone, so to say, of the organization. And if you fail, it's going to cost a lot. And somehow you have to gain that trust. That's a unique situation because they will be scared. I mean, changes are scary for everyone. and if you're coming and saying, well, we're going to make it look nice, but for that we'll have to redo all the org structures and redesign the process and do something else with people and the way how we work. Well, that's scary.
Yes, it is scary. And one of the traps that I've encountered more than once is actually the traditional project model. In some organizations, you also have a project management office with a project management director,
like the head of PMO.
Yeah, exactly, and or head of PMO or something like that. And since there's no project manager in a process like Scrum, it can be very difficult for them to see themselves in this new way of having work task flowing in the organization and organizing work tasks and organizing requirements when what they've been educated for and what they've been working as for years does not exist. In this media company, there was no project management office, but there was technical project managers. It was really important that I worked together with their manager, which was actually also the development manager of the media company, and we together decided that, well, we should actually tear down the project management role and transform the technical project managers to product owners and educate them in that. So they would have this, at that time there was a certified product owner course, so they could have that and find a new identity in their job, and actually that was the surrounding organization that was actually reorganized in order to be aligned with the Scrum principles. In another company later on, I had this head of PMO or project manager director, which claimed to understand Agile really well, and probably did, but on the other hand, was not willing to transform her project managers to product owners, not at all. In that situation, I actually ended up having a 3 Scrum teams with Scrum Masters, but no product owners. Because I failed to tear down the project management office together with the stakeholders. That was in another insurance company, which provides travel insurance or travel assistance for insurance companies, where I was working as head of development, head of software development.
But I think this is a very typical situation. It's not just because people don't like things. People resist not so much changes, but they resist being changed. And as you said, when people had to find out their new work identity, I mean, some of them might have been working for like, I don't know, 5-10 years to become project managers, and maybe they were proud of that, and giving that up might not come that easily. I think it's super complicated to make that transition, and it's not the new processes that are hard to install. It's important and it's hard to get people on board with such a change.
Yes, it is. I personally try to persuade project managers to become product owners by saying everything that is really cool and interesting about project management is actually exactly what is maintained in the product owner role. You still have to do risk calculation, stakeholder management, and you have to do high-level planning, release planning, and share your plans with the customers and all that stuff that I, as project manager, has found really interesting. Where all the tedious stuff like resource allocation and detailed project management has vanished from that role.
Plus, you're very close to the development team where things are actually happening.
Yeah, it's actually moved to other roles. All that stuff that more or less is tedious and laborious and just has to be done in a project management role. that has vanished. Then the difficult thing comes when you meet people that really love project administration.
Yes.
Because then they see that's all the stuff they love about the project management role that has vanished, like being able to resource allocate and then change the resource allocation 30 or 40 times. But for many project managers, they find this risk analysis, stakeholder management, and high-level planning as the most interesting part. So they are. That's the topics that you should try to use to persuade them that, well, your job is about to become even cooler than it was before.
I mean, you're like getting responsibility of the product. You should be able to get the customer insights. You communicate and interact with them a lot. You bring that knowledge in the organization and to your team. Well, of course, through some levels of communication and assessments and prioritization within the org, but I think you can make much more as a product owner in the organization than as a project manager, at least in the modern world. Probably that's the shift of the kind of power and influence we got with Agile mindset coming into the companies.
people should also be aware that you actually also lose a level of control, because and that was actually one thing that when I had this discussion with this head of PMO, she was used to that. When you define the project, you assemble the team, you make a team formation, and then you can work according to Scrum, and do sprints, and then complete the project, and then let the team members go on, the project members go on to other projects. That was how she viewed how a process like Scrum could be utilized. Whereas opposed to the main idea that you should actually avoid all the time-consuming tasks of team formation if you actually keep the team together and let the projects and project tasks come to the team, which is Scrum is supposed to work. That you form stable teams, and then you assign project tasks into that team. This I simply failed to explain.
But it's not easy, and I mean, it's if you haven't done that, it's really hard for you to see that through the eyes of another person who's explaining that to you. And it might sound like crazy. How can you not control people in task flow? How can you rely on something called self-organized teams? What does it mean, self-organized teams? I mean, they would actually do the work, achieve the goals on their own without someone like standing in front of them and like giving them the carrot and the stick every time. It's hard.
Well, we come back to the agile values. You actually have to have trust in people. You actually have to trust that people do their best in order to achieve the goals that you ask them to achieve. You should actually test these values when you hire people. That's where you should ultimately find the people who share the agile values.
It's fantastic to kind of learn these cases. And if I would be a new person coming to the organization that would do the transformation, where would you recommend this person to start? A new person,
of course, should use time to actually analyze and understand the business and the organization, and find out who are the stakeholders, map out how the processes are working. That's very, very easy for me to state, but it's actually a very, very delicate and difficult task to do.
And it includes.
I know you, Dennis. Dennis, you are really, really good at that. But
thank you.
But I've experienced that a couple of times. That's actually the starting point. You must understand the business. You must understand the value stream. You must understand how does this company earn money? How are the funding taking place? Who are deciding? And if your job is actually to start an agile transformation or to be part of an agile transformation, then based on your knowledge of the stakeholders, find your allies. Find who can actually support you in that process. You might not be able to find who will resist change, because you will not probably you will not know that in advance. That will emerge as you move on. But try to find your allies, and based on that, form a transformation team. This is another task one single person can achieve. You need to actually form a team and meet on a regular basis, and then in this team build a roadmap. How should we actually do the next steps, like traditional steps of a Scrum process or Kanban process, like building a product, backlog.
How would a generic roadmap look like? I think you've mentioned a couple of steps, right? Like build teams.
Yeah, that is actually well, it's basically just a timeline where you will identify when should I do my preparation, when should I educate people, when should we actually build or identify the product roadmap, when should we refine the process. I actually I think it's important to actually build a process, like what steps are the development tasks going through, what steps are other types of tasks going through, what steps are requirements going through in order to, I know it doesn't sound really according to the Agile Manifesto, but it is still important that you actually define and document your process.
Exactly. This kind of process it's like kind of a backbone of the development flow, and fixing the development flow is, I consider it one of the easiest tasks, because you can actually, if you're technical enough, you can see what has happened, you can see where the code is, you can see what is, like who's reviewing it, who's testing it. And it's essential because through this process, you can make things which are invisible to the organization visible. And when they're visible, they are manageable.
Yes. But it still varies from organization to organization of how many test steps should we go through? Should we have a process step for each type of test, or should we review, or is it mandatory to review code? Who's actually responsible for signing off? Who's responsible for approval? Should we have approval steps before we complete it? That varies from organization to organization. So you need to define that process and document it. In the roadmap, you need to set time aside to do that because it takes time to get everybody on board. You also need to set out time in your roadmap to define what process support tools should you use, which is also something that you start on. That is, decide first, are we going to use a process support tool, or should we just use sticky notes on whiteboards?
Which is also a tool.
Which is also a process support tool that's just not digitalized. Of course, that only works if you have co-located teams. If you have distributed teams, or like in these days where many people is working remotely, it might be a good idea to have a digitalized tool. That could be Jira or similar tool. But anyway, you need to evaluate a number of tools for that could be used, and choose one that fits your organizational needs and fits into that system portfolio of your organization. That varies from organization to organization. I mentioned Jira. That's Rally. There's tons of other tools. I've selected Jira 3 times, but currently we're not using Jira because the rest of the organization is using some other tool that nobody outside the bureau world has ever heard of, but which actually partly support Agile. So we have scrapped Jira and trying to utilize that tool just to be aligned with the rest of the organization. So each and every in each and every transformation, you come up with different outcomes. Part of the roadmap should also be, you need to staff the roles, and you need to decide on who should be Scrum Masters, who should be product owners. If you have many teams, you need actually also to find a chief product owner. So you need to actually identify that organization and reorganize if needed. That also takes time and should be put into a roadmap. So a roadmap is that could take from 3 to 4 months, but it's still a good idea to plan it. And the reason why I call it a roadmap rather than a plan is that just indicates a preparedness for actually changing as you go.
And for the management, it always provides like a sense of safety that everything is in control, and this is where you will go and lead the whole organization. And I guess someone there will be like building teams, making sure that the team dynamics is going well, working with their backlogs, etc., etc.
Exactly. So you were asking what should be in that roadmap, and together we've mentioned something like 7 or 8 items to put in that roadmap. Also, I mentioned that you should educate Scrum Masters and product owners to come if they're not familiar with the process. Nowadays, more and more people are familiar with Scrum and Kanban, but just 5 or 6 years ago, it was something you might have heard about it, you might have read about it, but nobody have really tried to experience to work with it and experience it. You also need to educate the stakeholders.
Yes.
Like, and that's absurdly difficult sometimes. The stakeholders, that's every person in the surrounding organization which provides a stream of requests coming into the development organization, and the stream of requests coming to the product owners, and they should also.
Levi wants to be part of this.
Anyway, many of these stakeholders has been used, that I experienced again and again, just to get to a team member, developer, and ask for a request and expect it to be resolved immediately. And thus created a lot of variance in the projects that these team members have been working on. Minimizing projects or product variance is one of the key things in agile project management, and at the same time you also ensure a more undisturbed working day for the team members. So it's also one of the key things for the involved people to actually feel that this way of working is satisfying, because they can experience that they can work more undisturbed and more focused, and thus achieve a higher level of productivity. So these stakeholders, to teach them and inform them, that's very important also, and that should be put in the roadmap so it can actually be scheduled and implemented.
I guess for the large organizations nowadays, you will have to also educate people in Kanban if they will need an alternative of rapidly changing environment and requirements.
Yes, both Kanban and Scrum, depending on what you decide to set up. And you the most important thing is when to start. When is you actually, what's the starting date of your first sprint? Do you have a sprint of 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Then you can actually make a complete plan of the first number of sprints, and also part of the roadmap should actually have a development roadmap developed that actually is aligned with all the
transformation
deliverable expectations that comes from the stakeholders. And then when the day arrives, the first sprint starts, and after a number of sprints, the stakeholders should be re-educated, re-informed that, remember, we still have this process running. You still need to go to the product owner rather than the team member if you have any requirements or any changes. And of course, it's built into Scrum to evaluate and refine the process by using retrospectives and similar methodologies of process improvement, continuous process improvement. So
in this,
here you go.
That's really good. In this transformation, when we talk about the stages on the roadmap, for the stakeholders, you have to somehow ensure the deliveries are still up and running while all these preparations are taking place. How are you getting time for that? It's an investment in time and also resources and money.
It's an investment in time, but usually the preparation team can set time aside for that. It's the preparation time for the involved people who is responsible for continuous development and continuous operation. It's mainly the time they utilize in building backlog items, and the time they utilize in training sessions that could affect the overall operation. and that is far less than the time used by the preparation team, which sometimes can work more or less full time on it. That would just be a fraction of their time. So I don't really find that as an issue, or I've experienced that as an issue. That investment of time, building or transforming a product backlog is an activity that should be done anyway, because all development organizations have some sort of registration of the requirements, and that registration needs to be continuously maintained. So it's not an extra task to actually build a product backlog compared to maintaining any kind of registry of requirements. If you have an organization where I tried that once, where the registry of requirement was just a number of mails in various people's mailboxes, then that's just to collect the requirements in a product backlog is an extremely valuable exercise by itself.
People
just in order to create visibility of what is actually been undertaken by the development organization. And it's actually, when it comes to planning, time liberating, as opposed to try to manage tasks that is just mediated through emails or communicated through emails.
Good arguments, indeed. Okay.
Okay, take 3, scene 4.
That's nice. So during these kind of experiences you had, that definitely were things that were not going fine. And I mean, those are like maybe the pitfalls that you would typically experience. What are the important difficulties that you feel that you should mention?
Well, I mentioned this clash with a traditional project management model that needs to be resolved. But besides that, I find that one of the most difficult topics in order to ensure real self-organization. So it's not just a superficial process where people is following some rituals, but do not really understand that the control has changed towards people and towards self-management. This I actually find really, really difficult, and I've seen various levels of how well this has been achieved in the various setups. First of all, there are habits in the behavior of people that more or less needs to be addressed. It can also be regarded, for some people, it can be regarded as how should I put it? If it can make the day easier for people if they can push the responsibility for undertaking some task to a manager. So and also the responsibility of assessing whether a task is prioritized and important to somebody else. And if the manager is not there, then the Scrum Master. So rather than asking myself the question, what is the next most important thing to do in order to have the highest business value out of my work, I ask somebody else for that, and I ask to get a task allocated to me.
Isn't the sense of security? Because if you're not safe at work,
I've experienced somebody that has really have difficulties in actually undertaking this self-management responsibility, and it is understandable, and it's also it might underpin a higher degree of security, because if anything goes wrong, at least it's not my fault. Somebody else is to blame.
Yes.
But that's one side of self-organization that can actually be difficult to achieve, and that varies a lot from person to person, how well that goes on, and how they can actually acquire this self-management. There can also be some unconscious resistance from a Scrum Master who is used to to allocate tasks to people, as I experienced in my first setup. The second thing is actually also, and that is actually perhaps a bit more difficult to deal with, this is actually also if you have a team that has been working on some products for a very, very long time, they're specialized. Mm-hmm. So they feel a personal responsibility for a part of the system that only they have created. And in a team where you should actually have potentially many people be able to do the same task, I've seen examples where people is actually already at the sprint planning is allocated who is going to do what because they know best. That's actually very, very typical. In my current setup, I have many different competences because I have a team consisting of analytics, programming Python, and developers using C# and some other developers using PHP. It's also a competence question. So it's actually quite fair that they more or less pre-allocate themselves to some tasks. But if that's not the case, that actually a behavior that prevents knowledge sharing, and it also prevents the ability to have a complete team focused on finishing the undone jobs. So that's also difficult, and that can be attributed to high level of specialization, where that's also where job security comes in. If I have a high level of specialization, if I'm the only guy who know how this works, then my chances of losing my job is less. I'm actually protecting myself. Whereas we have a risk here. We have a risk of actually having a key person who's the only person who knows about this stuff, and we need to deal with that risk in order to have more people educated in that specialized software.
Classical situation with old systems and
that's difficult. Another difficult area that I've experienced is actually this protection of the team. That's part of the Scrum Master role, but it's also something that the product owner should facilitate, or an agile coach should facilitate. All the disturbances that creates variances in the planning that we try to deal with it by having defining sprint velocity and filling degrees when we do planning, but it still happens. People are still walking to the guys they know can solve the problem and ask them to do some favors. So you need to cope with that by educating both your own team members that they should always say, well, I am having this commitment. I jeopardize my commitment if I say yes to you, but ask the product owner. He might be able to help you anyways. And as I told earlier, to actually inform and educate the stakeholders about what is going on, what is the process, why is it important to protect the team so they can work as productive as possible. You have probably experienced that as well.
Yeah, many times, and it takes an effort to do that. But yeah, we've done a lot of education, but we also use simple techniques like putting a hammer and pliers on the table. And if you say that if someone disturbs the team, these are the tools we have to use to educate people, and it worked.
Yes,
just from the first time.
I've actually written down a process for changing the sprint commitment.
Wow, what is that?
Which is it is according to the Scrum guide, but it's just writing it down and putting it into our own process. So if you want, and there's also, I also emphasize, people should also help each other. So if somebody come and ask you a question, answer that question. If somebody come and ask you to do a small favor, do that small favor. But we have a defined limit of time. How long time can you actually do? And if it goes above that defined limit of time, stop and tell the guy to get to the product owner to actually
Oh,
prioritize.
I understand.
So people do not jeopardize their commitment.
I always found it hard because, yeah, we've done those kind of guidelines, and it was hard because the favor might be small, but then you don't, when you assess that as a person, you don't take into account the effect of flow, the switching of the context, and those things might be like time consuming. And if you look at some of the researchers, they say it's between 20 and 40 minutes that you might need to get back into the state of flow.
Yes.
And then it's, oh, that's a lot of time.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot of time, so it is important. Yeah, it's a bit about the same topic concerning team protection. Is actually the ability for a team to maintain the focus on a commitment. That can also be difficult sometimes.
Yes.
Because all these requests that comes for, could you help me with this, and please change that, and that's really important as the stakeholders come directly to the team members, and is bypassing both the Scrum Master and the product owner. That's actually quite normal behavior in many development organizations, and this erodes the commitment. So I have experienced that this idea that the team should really commit to the sprint goal as a difficult topic, because what happens if they don't succeed in the sprint review of actually fulfilling the commitment? Well, you shouldn't punish them. Perhaps you should celebrate them when they succeed. Perhaps rewarding them by whatever is important for the team members. That could have a dinner or something like that, or
in Sweden,
anything else that could reward them. So
yeah, just enough to work with
yes,
with beer would be great. In many places, alcohol here is forbidden. So
yeah. Oh yeah, right now you're talking from Sweden, so that should be an imported beer.
Oh.
Okay. So that sums up some of the parts that can be difficult.
So I guess we can soon wrap up. So
yes.
The last points.
I strongly believe in the value of the agile processes, and I've been working with traditional management, project management for many years, and I have really found it valuable to use agile processes, and for many reasons. Unfortunately, I've never been able to actually measure productivity. That's because I mostly haven't established a baseline before the transformation in order to measure the change after a transformation. But I have experienced people become happy, and I've experienced organizations to actually be transformed from an ill organization where people was becoming ill to a healthy organization with happy people that was happy to go to work and was doing and contributing with valuable stuff in that process. What I have experienced again and again is actually to have successful transformation is to prepare and plan, to educate people, and to have a focus on involving people and getting people to understand the idea behind it and the values behind it, and to develop good processes and use time to develop good processes, and then document your processes and tools. That is also important in when it comes to compliance, when the IT auditors walk by and ask you to actually document that you follow your process. Of course, you should document your process. I also again and again experienced how important it is to ensure senior management support and understanding, not just the support. Well, I cannot highlight enough how important it is to actually engage the people involved in this process. That's simply the most important things about having a successful transformation. That is maintaining your focus on involving and engaging people in order to achieve a successful transformation.
No.
And of course, you should believe that you're doing something good. That is that agile planning and agile development is the right thing to do, and I strongly believe in that, and have lived with that all during these transformations.
It's hard to be a touring agent who sells tours to Egypt without ever being yourself in the Egypt. So yes.
So that sums up some of my points here. There's of course a lot more to be said about agile and agile transformations, but I hope that it has proven useful. And thank you very much for discussing it with me, Dennis.
Thank you, Jesper. This was very good, and I think it's like, you know, interviewing an expert might not be like, you know, like reading a book, but it gives the feeling, it gives the sense of urgency, what is important at which point, and yeah, you can be encouraged that, you know, even the best of us sometimes fail and they learn, and that's the most important thing to do.
Yes. I think there's been a lot of focus on all the pitfalls and failures, but it's also important to actually observe that this can also happen. You know, also when it comes to project management, the number of failed projects outweighs the number of successful projects when it comes to IT development, unfortunately.
That is true.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesper. It was nice talking to you.
Finally we did it.
Yes.